Good evening, and welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. Tonight is Thursday night, May 23rd, 2024. I am so thrilled to be with you. I've been looking forward to this all week, and I'm grateful to every one of you giving your time so that we can study together tonight. Tonight's shiur is sponsored in memory of Yitzchak Yosef ben Naftali Chaim, Zichrona Livracha. May his memory be a blessing, and thank you very much for the sponsorship. I heard this story from Rabbi Baruch Ruderman. There was a little old lady, and she sold pretzels on a street corner for $1 each. And every day, there was a young man who would leave his office during lunchtime, and as he passed the pretzel lady, he would leave her $1, but he never took a pretzel. This went on every day for more than 3 years. The two of them never spoke. One day, as the young man passed the old lady's pretzel stand and left his $1 as usual, the pretzel lady spoke to him. And she said, "They're $1.50 now." I think that's a great story because that is a major component to what tzedakah is and the distinction between tzedakah and charity. In a situation of tzedakah, the recipient is entitled to what they receive. And we have this mitzvah in this week's Torah portion, the Parsha BeHar. The Torah says, "V'chiyamuch achicha umata yado imach," when your fellow will fall, figuratively, on hard times and become needy, v'hechazakta bo, you should strengthen him. Ger v'soshav, whether they are a person who is originally from here or they're an immigrant. V'chai imach, and you should make sure that they are able to live comfortably together with you. You have to take care of someone who has come on hard times. And the mitzvah is not just to give money, as important as that is. The most important part of the mitzvah is to give dignity. Our sages in the Talmud say, "Ein tzedakah mishtalemes el lefi chesed sheba." The way that the mitzvah of tzedakah is evaluated by God, it's not much on how much it is. It's based on how much kindness you showed in giving dignity to the recipient. That is what causes the ultimate benefit and the value of your mitzvah of tzedakah. Not how much you gave, but how you give it. Years ago, there was a project in our community that was started by and run by Federation CJA. It was in response to a significant downturn in the economy. You may remember this. They opened what they called Le Café. It was at the Federation CJA building. And every Tuesday and Thursday, they served dinner. No charge, no questions asked. Many of us were volunteers. A group of us from ADAF often went as volunteers to help serve the dinner, and I often went and served as a waiter. And it lasted for quite some time, as I remember, a couple of years. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing. But on the one hand, it was very frightening and upsetting because every Tuesday and Thursday night, there were between 250 and 300 people at each dinner. All kinds of Jews, religious, non-religious, immigrants, native Montrealers, old, young, children. It was heartbreaking to see the effects of financial need in such a large portion of our Jewish community here in Montreal. And at the same time, it was tremendously inspiring what our community was doing and is doing, especially how people are helped with such dignity and kindness. Once, I was serving, and there was an older man who was sitting having his dinner, and he recognized me. He used to daven at a dath before I came, when it was still in Utrama. He remembered Rabbi Bender, who was the first rabbi of Adath. So he said to me, "Are they paying you at Adath?" I said, "What?" He said, "They're paying you weekly, right?" "Very weekly." Baruch Hashem, that's not the case, but it was a good joke. One night, I saw a man about my age. He came in, and he was a person you could just look at him and tell he was clearly in need. He stood by the door, and then he left. And then he came back. And he sat down. I served him. I had never seen him before. He did not know who I was. I was watching while I was serving others, and this man started to cry. So I went over to him and sat down next to him. And he said to me, "I am so embarrassed to be here. I can't believe that I need this. Just a year ago, it would have been unimaginable that I would need this." I spoke to him. I listened to him. It turns out that he is the grandson of one of the most prominent Adath members in our history. But that kind of change of circumstance can happen to anyone. Now, as we've discussed many times, one of the primary ways we come closer to God is through prayer. And as we've also discussed many times, for some reason or reasons, it is increasingly harder for many of us to have prayer work for us, to bring us closer to God. We talk about it, we discuss it, we try to come up with ideas, but the bottom line is it's difficult. Many Jews today have difficulty making prayer meaningful in the way that it's supposed to be. I have a friend, a wonderful, wonderful person. And for a while, he was coming to shul regularly. But it wasn't working for him. And then I didn't see him for quite a while. The next time I saw him was at an event hosted by MADA. Now, MADA is another wonderful organization in our community, serving and delivering food and other supplies to those in need, Jewish and non-Jewish. I and many of us at Adath, and probably many of you, have been active volunteers there for years. It's an incredible organization. So I was attending this event, and I saw my friend at this event, and he said to me, "I volunteer here. I deliver food every week. This is my shul. And I understood exactly what he was saying. Now, let me be clear. We can't give up on prayer. Prayer is too important. We need to continue to look for ways to reclaim prayer for its intended goal, and we are trying. But prayer is not the only way to approach God. And this is true for every single one of us. But especially if for whatever reason prayer is not doing it for you, if it's not working for you, serve. Serve dinner. Give someone dignity if you want to see the face of God. And there are so many opportunities here in Montreal, MADA, as I mentioned, Montrealers Helping Montrealers, which is a Facebook group which does incredible things of people helping each other. Federation CJA has so many projects going on. And many, many others are doing wonderful work. Do it. Get involved to help those in our community who need help. Do it to help yourself, to feel good about the good you are doing. And do it to help you come closer to God. This Sunday is Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. This Sunday is a respite from the period of mourning between Pesach and Shavuos. There are different customs about which of these days between Pesach and Shavuos we observe these customs of mourning, but on Sunday, Lag BaOmer, there's no mourning, there's music, there are weddings, there are barbecues, there are haircuts. Have a good time and celebrate. The classic reason for the mourning period during this time between Pesach and Shavuos, whichever days it is, but the classic reason for the mourning that gets interrupted by Lag BaOmer is stated in the Talmud. It comes from a passage in the Talmud. The Talmud says that there were 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. So this is shortly after the destruction of the Second Temple. Rabbi Akiva, of course, is the greatest sage of his time. And he had 24,000 students who died between Pesach and Shavuos of 1 year. 24,000 Torah scholars died between Pesach and Shavuos of 1 year. Why? The Talmud says, Mipnei shelo nahogu kavod zeh b'zeh, because they did not treat each other with the proper respect. It seems impossible. Can you imagine? Rabbi Akiva, the great Rabbi Akiva, is your Rebbe, your teacher. Rabbi Akiva is the one who taught that the Klal Gadol BaTorah, the most important fundamental lesson of the Torah, is V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your fellow as you love yourself. How is it possible that his students didn't absorb that message? It seems incredible. What is it that they did wrong? Well, we don't know. Because the Talmud does not tell us. There is no answer anywhere in the Talmud about what it means. What did they do wrong that called forth this terrible punishment that 24,000 Torah scholars should die within this period of weeks? There is no answer anywhere in the Talmud, and there is no answer in any of the commentaries to the Talmud. It's a mystery. My Rosh HaYeshiva, the head of the yeshiva at which I studied, Rabbi Yaakov Ruderman, of blessed memory, he suggested a possibility. Now, it's only a theory. There's no proof for it, but it's an intriguing theory. Listen carefully to what he suggested. Let's turn to a different volume of the Talmud, a completely different volume. What I quoted to you before was from Masechta Yevamos. This is from Masechta Menachos. Different volume, different subject. And the Mishnah says, Omer hayamater b'mdina u'shtehalechem b'migdash. Now, actually, we discussed this last week in the morning. I'm not going to go into the details of it now, but basically what it means is it's discussing the offering that was offered on the second day of Pesach and the offering that was offered on Shavuos. So first of all, there's a hint that this Mishnah is talking about details, technical details, about this period of the calendar between Pesach and Shavuos. Just keep that in the back of your mind. What the exact topic is not relevant to our discussion. I just want to tell you the following story. So the story goes like this. Yosef Rabbi Tarfon v'kokashile. Rabbi Tarfon was one of the primary students of Rabbi Akiva. So we're talking about a discussion that's taking place during among the greatest Torah scholars during the time of the Mishnah. These are the people whose opinions are now quoted for all time in the Mishnah. So Rabbi Tarfon had a question on the Mishnah. Again, it's not our subject what the question was. It's kind of technical. I just want to tell you the story. So Rabbi Tarfon couldn't figure this out. Amar lefan of Yehuda bar Nehemiah, there was another student. His name was Yehuda bar Nehemiah, and he said, I have an answer to your question. The Talmud says, Shasak Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon was silent. He realized that this younger scholar was able to answer the question that he himself, the great scholar Rabbi Tarfon, could not answer. Tzohavu ponav shel Yehuda ben Nehemiah. The face of Yehuda ben Nehemiah became radiant. Tzahavu is from the same word in Aramaic that means gold. Like he was radiating light. He was so happy, so proud of himself that he had provided the answer to a question that the great Rabbi Tarfon was not able to figure out. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was present. Remember, Rabbi Akiva is the student of both, is the teacher of both of them. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said to this younger scholar, Yehuda, tzavu panecha sha'ashavta zazaken. Your face becomes radiant because you were able to give an answer that even Rabbi Tarfon could not figure out. To Mahani, I would be surprised im tarich yomim, if you live much longer. Now, I just want to explain, this was not, God forbid, any kind of curse. This was an observation. Rabbi Akiva is making this observation. I would be surprised if you actually live much longer. Now, Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Eloi. Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Eloi, not the same Rabbi Yehuda, a different one. Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Eloi says, in retelling this story, Oso HaPerek, when did this happen? Pros HaPesachaya. It was just after Passover. Intriguing. Just after Passover. Ukishalisi latzeres, and when I went to visit my Rabbi Akiva for Shavuos, sha'alti acharav, I asked about this fellow, Yehuda ben Nehemiah. Yehuda ben Nehemiah, hechanhu. I didn't see him. So I asked, Yehuda ben Nehemiah, what happened to him? Where is he? V'amru li, and they told me, niftar, v'holach lo. He died. Now, it's a very subtle thing when the Talmud says, Tzahovu panav, his face was radiant because he came up with the answer that Rabbi Tarfon couldn't figure out. I mean, it was radiant because of what? Maybe it was radiant because he was really happy that he understood an aspect of Torah. Maybe it was radiant because he felt a little bit of pride that he could figure out something that the great Rabbi Akiva couldn't, the great Rabbi Tarfon couldn't figure out. But you see how subtle it is. It's nothing overt there. Now, we don't know. But what my Rebbe, Rabbi Yaakov Ruderman, suggests is maybe this is the kind of behavior that was taking place. Nothing that was outright demeaning to another, God forbid. But something so subtle, it could have been both at the same time that he meant. But maybe there was a little bit of pleasure that he was taking in that the greater scholar did not know something and he did. Now I want to make it clear, there is no connection drawn between these two passages. It's only circumstantial evidence. It happened to a student of Rabbi Akiva. It happened between Shavuos and Pesach, and he died. But my Rav Ruderman, the Rosh HaYeshiva, said, could it be that this is an example of the type of deficiency? Maybe it's something like this. And for this kind of behavior, 24,000 of the greatest scholars of Israel lost their lives. Because they had Rabbi Akiva as their teacher and role model, so they were held to a higher standard. And presumably they did not sufficiently take his primary lesson to heart. Let me share with you a story from Dr. Abraham Twersky. So first, I need a short introduction to this story. Often in printed texts, like a Siddur or some other Jewish book, God's name is not written out Yud, then Hey, then Vav, then Hey, the four-letter name of God, but it's represented with two Yuds, Yud, Yud. You may recognize this. When you see Yud, Yud in the Siddur, in the prayer book, it means God. It's a very common printing convention. Here's another separate piece of information, again, as an introduction. In the printed Chumash, in the Torah scroll itself, there's no punctuation. But in a printed Chumash, in the printed version of the Bible, there is punctuation. And the common convention is to end the pasuk, sof pasuk, the end of the verse, with a colon, which is one mark on top of another. Where we in English would use a period at the end of a sentence, the normal convention in a printed Chumash in the Torah, printed, is to use a colon, one mark on top of another. Okay, that's the introduction. So here's the story from Dr. Twersky. A teacher told his young students that two Yuds together, Yud, Yud, are a representation of God's name, and they should be read as God's name. So there was one child in the class that he started reading from the Chumash, that he was called on to read from the Chumash. And whenever this child came to the end of the verse, Sof Pasuk, he said the name of God. So the teacher said, why are you saying the name of God? It's the end of the verse. It's not God's name. So the student said, well, no, you told us that when there are two yuds, two marks, one next to the other, the colon, it's one on top of the other, but it's like two yuds, that we should say God's name? The teacher said, no. Listen carefully. He said, when you see two yuds standing side by side, or two yids, two Jews standing side by side, that refers to God. But if one is standing on top of the other, a colon is one mark on top of the other. If there are two yuds, like two yids, two Jews, one is on top of the other, that's not God's name. That's Sof Pasuk. In other words, God's presence dwells when there are two yuds, two Jews, who stand alongside each other, relating as equals. But if one yid, one Jew, considers themselves above and superior to the other, there is no divine presence. On the contrary, that indicates a termination. The relief and release of Lag BaOmer this Sunday should remind us how seriously we must strive to never look down on another, to never consider ourselves superior to another, because that is Sof Pasuk, and it does not lead us toward God. Permit me to share with you one last insight. Again, a lesson I learned from my Rosh HaYeshiva, Rabbi Yaakov Ruderman, a blessed memory. And again, relating to Lag BaOmer, which occurs this Sunday. So let's start with a question. So we understand the classic answer that I gave you before is that between Pesach and Shavuos, 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died. But on Lag BaOmer, on that one day, nobody died. Well, if the reason that Lag BaOmer is special is because on that day nobody died, why celebrate? It's just not a day of mourning. What reason is there to celebrate? So here's the passage in the Talmud. I want to read it directly to you. Amru, our sages in the Talmud say, this is Masechta Yevamos, Shnei Maser Elef Zugim Talmidim Hayila Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students, 24,000 students, migivat ad Antiparas, from one end of Israel to another. V'kulon mesu beperek echad, and they all died. 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died in one season. We explained between Pesach and Shavuos. Mibnei shelo nagu kavod zeh lezeh, because they did not treat each other with the proper respect, as we discussed before. Tana, we learned, kulam mesu mi Pesach vi'ad atzeres. They all died between Pesach and Shavuos. Let's think about Rabbi Akiva for a moment. The great Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest scholars in the history of the Jewish people. Imagine what it felt like for him to lose 24,000 students. Everything he had worked for his entire life. Everything he had devoted himself to. Elsewhere, the Talmud tells the story of how he left home. He was away from his family for many years. This was his life. And all of them died. And by the way, when this happened, it was near the end of his life. He was an old man at this point. Imagine the experience of losing everything. Well, if it hasn't happened to one, I don't know if it's possible to imagine it. Think for a moment about Noach. Noach is living in the world. God comes and says, build an ark. God says, I'm going to destroy the world except for you and your family and the animals. And Noach is on the ark with his family and the animals for almost a period of a year. And he comes out of the ark and the world is empty. Nothing. Garnished. No people, no plants, no animals except whatever was on the ark with him. I mean, can you imagine? I don't think so. No, I cannot imagine what it must be like to wake up one day and there's no world. It's empty. It's gone. Nothing. Zero. Everything that existed is gone. How do you live like that? You know, the Torah goes on to say the next thing that happened is that Noach became drunk. I understand it's a criticism of Noach, but I mean, how else do you respond to such a catastrophe? I mean, it is literally, not figuratively, literally unimaginable. In a different sense, the Holocaust. The Holocaust. I mean, person and this, and we know some of these people. We have known some of these people. A person goes through the absolute worst that humanity can represent and loses everything. Even sometimes their belief in God, even certainly their trust in mankind. And they've lost everything. Nothing. Zero. Not a penny. Not a person. Nothing. And they have to start over. I cannot imagine. I understand. I've had the privilege of knowing such people, but I cannot imagine. I don't think anyone who has not experienced it could imagine. What is it like to have everything in your life taken away? Gone. Taken away. And now, what do you do? October 7th, Kibbutz Be'eri. You're living in this community and the other communities around Gaza. October 7th. And all of a sudden, in one day, everything is gone. Everyone is dead. Your family is killed. Your house is burned. Everything is gone. How do you deal with all of a sudden this catastrophe? And there's no precedent for it. How do you go on? How do you wake up the next day? I have no idea. I omitted 2 lines in the Talmud intentionally. Let me read it again completely. 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died because they did not show the proper respect one for another. V'haya ha'olam shamem. The world was desolate. There was almost no Torah left. How can the Jewish people survive? Leaving aside the terrible tragedy for 24,000 students who were great scholars and their families, the tragedy, but leaving that aside just for a moment. What's going to happen to Torah? What's going to happen to Judaism? Who's left to teach? Who's left to inspire? Who's left to lead? V'haya ha'olam shamein. The world was destroyed. The world was empty. It was desolate of Torah. Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva etzel Rabbeinu shebedarom v'shana lehem. Rabbi Akiva found 5 students left alive. 5. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Elazar. 5. 24,000 dead. Rabbi Akiva starts over with 5. Says the Talmud, V'heim heim ha'amidu Torah osasha. They, those 5 students, generated and transmitted Torah to the next generation. Five students. These 5 students that's what Rabbi Akiva did. His whole life's work, everything that he cared about, everything that he worked for, his entire world was destroyed. What does he do? He starts over with 5. And the Talmud tells us that these 5 were able to reestablish all that had been lost by the 24,000 who had died. And by the way, we know what they accomplished because the next generation, which was only taught by these 5, the next generation was one of the most prolific, important eras in all of Jewish history. They created the Mishnah. That which we have for all time, the Mishnah, was created by them. One of the many lessons you see from this is the power of each individual to transform the world. Margaret Mead, the great anthropologist, said, "Never doubt that a small group of individuals can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And that is worth celebrating. The resilience to start over after such a catastrophe, after losing everything, the strength, the courage, the fortitude that it took, the indomitable spirit this takes. And we are seeing it today. I shared this with some of you before, a few months ago. I heard this story from my aunt, Joan Crystal, who lives in Efrat, Israel, and she's been sending emails about what's going on and what she's experiencing, what she's feeling. And I shared this with some of you back in December. It was during Hanukkah. And she says the following. She wrote the following. Last Sunday night, it was the Sunday night of Hanukkah. Last Sunday night, so she's writing this in December 2023. Last Sunday night in Israel, there was a gathering for the survivors of the Nova party, where 340 beautiful souls were murdered by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. While so many others were taken into captivity as hostages in Gaza, and we know that so many of them are still there, suffering that we cannot imagine. The get-together drew hundreds of young Israelis who showed up in solidarity with a desire to begin to heal. This gathering took place in a large hall. On the far wall of the hall, there was a sign in huge blue lights. And the sign said, in English, "We will dance again." We will dance again. Dafka this year, on Sunday, celebrate Lag BaOmer, because we will dance again. My friends, I wish you a great evening, a beautiful Shabbos, and a joyous Lag BaOmer. And I look forward to seeing you soon in person.